We give you our 3 best bets for Championship Saturday in college football, and it all starts right now. Hey guys, it's Matt from GrandstandBettors.com, and we are back with our Championship Saturday plays for the 2022 college football season. We'll get to those picks in just a moment, but first, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our bowl predictions coming up here in the next month or so. And while you're at it, smash that like button if you're ready for a little bit more chaos here in the last weekend of college football. I know I am. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our first matchup and start things off with number 13, Kansas State, and number 3, TCU in the noon p.m. Eastern time slot. TCU at the moment, 2.5-point favorites. The over-under is set at 61.5. Kansas State Wildcats, they had to win last week against Kansas to clinch a spot in this Big 12 championship game, and they did just that. Offensively, quarterback Will Howard threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, while they also attacked the Jayhawks defense on the ground, putting up 230 rushing yards as a team and 4 rushing touchdowns. Running back Deuce Vaughn continues to have a stellar season. This guy has over 1,300 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns for the Wildcats. And the TCU defense cannot forget about the offensive wide receiver Malik Knowles, who's put up 700 yards catching this year as well. A lot that TCU is going to have to cover on the entire field. Now, in their matchup earlier this season, the Wildcats put up 28 points in that matchup. They actually led 28-10 after 21 points scored in the second quarter, but then their offense stalled and TCU's defense stepped up, holding them to 0 points in the second half. They need to do a much better job at capitalizing on opportunities to put points on the board against TCU in this one, or their defense has to step up and figure out a way to stop TCU's offense if they want to have a fighting chance in this championship game. So, let's talk about TCU for a moment. Before last week, there was a lot of talk about whether Iowa State's defense would be able to slow down the TCU offense, but that was put to rest very quickly as the Horned Frogs put up 24 points in the first quarter against the Cyclones and 62 points in total on their 12th win of the season. Their defense also, again, looked good. Granted, it was against a struggling Iowa State offense, but what we want to highlight here is they held Cyclones star wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson to only 2 receptions and 11 yards on the game. Prior to last week, no other team held him under 90 yards at all other than West Virginia. That was a statement from this secondary, and again, like we've said countless times now, this defense has put something together after a few weeks back. They look more and more legit as a complete team on the field. They now sit 1 win away from clinching a college football playoff berth, and this team knows it. Max Duggan and this TCU offense have put up some of the best numbers in college football this season for a reason, and if Kansas State can't figure out how to slow them down, it's clear who's going to win this Big 12 championship. So, speaking of which, what is our best bet for the Big 12 championship game in Dallas, Texas? Well, we do not understand why this line is only at 2.5 after the way TCU played last week and the fact that they already beat this Kansas State team by 10 earlier in the season. Maybe it's because it's being played in Dallas, or maybe it's because the books still don't trust that TCU defense. But the Horned Frogs are 9-2-1 against the spread this season. So, with our first play for Championship Saturday, we're going to take TCU minus 2.5 over Kansas State. Now, the next matchup we're going to look at is number 11 LSU and number 1 Georgia in the 4 p.m. Eastern time slot. Georgia 17.5-point favorites at the moment, over-under set at 51.5. LSU Tigers watched their season and really any hope of making the college football playoffs slip out of their hands last week during the 38-23 loss to the Aggies. They still are in this SEC championship game, though, but the implications of this game have certainly dropped as we have a hard time seeing them sneak into the college football playoffs with 3 losses, even if they do get a win here over Georgia. In any case, though, the Tigers had a successful first season behind head coach Brian Kelly, and the biggest reason for this was quarterback Jaden Daniels. He led their offense to averaging 32.5 points per game thanks to 2,500 passing yards and 15 touchdowns. And he also led this team rushing with 800 yards on the ground and 11 more rushing touchdowns. Now, with a young wide receiver core, the sky is the limit for this offense as long as next year they don't get hurt by that transfer portal and maybe get a better threat running back and take some of the carries away from Daniel's hands. Where the Tigers, though, also do need to improve, where they've struggled this season, is on defense. They give up 21 points per game, 200 yards passing, and 150 yards rushing per game this season. With loaded offenses in the SEC, this is not going to cut it. As we saw in 2 of the 3 losses, they gave up 38 points to Texas A&M and 40 points to Tennessee. They also gave up 30 points or more to Alabama and Florida, and the bad news for them is that Georgia's offense, it's not going to be any easier this week. LSU's defensive line has only recorded 25 sacks all season, and that lack of pressure up front is certainly going to hurt them and make it that much harder to slow down the Bulldogs' passing attack. Now, speaking of the Bulldogs, they are the #1 team in the country, and it's not even close. They've won all their games on the season by an average of 27 points, which included a dominating 27-13 win over Tennessee. Stetson Bennett played another good season for them, throwing for 3,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. He's only been sacked 7 times all season, which shows you how good this offensive line has been all year long. With how poorly LSU has generated pressure on opposing quarterbacks, this should be a relatively easy game to keep Bennett protected again and give him time to find guys like Brock Bowers and McConkley downfield, who both have over 600 yards receiving on the season. Now, the Bulldogs have a very steady rushing attack behind 2 of their running backs, who also have over 600 yards rushing on the season. They also average 5.3 yards per carry and have combined for 15 touchdowns. On the other side of the ball, Georgia has one of the best defenses, as we know, in college football, which is still astounding to us given how many guys they lost to the NFL last year. They rank 4th overall. Their secondary is 22nd. They have the best run defense in college football, and they have given up the least amount of points of any team this season. The heart of this defense lies in their linebackers, specifically Dumas Johnson and Mondin. These guys have 117 tackles together, a few sacks, and are all over the field in coverage. So what is our best bet in this SEC championship game? Well, with all of the weapons Georgia has on offense, we just don't see LSU being able to stop this team, and the Bulldogs look to finally win the SEC championship game for the first time since 2017. LSU has some firepower on offense, but with how dominant the Georgia defense has been, LSU is going to need a miracle in this one to keep it close. We aren't going to have to over-evaluate this game. We're just going to take the facts and what we've seen on the eye test all season long. So with our second best bet, a championship Saturday, we're going to take the Georgia Bulldogs minus 17.5 points over the LSU Tigers. Now, before we get into our third best bet, a championship Saturday, just a reminder, if you want our full card of NFL and college football plays for this upcoming weekend, head on over to grandstandbettors.com. Become part of our family and start living that grandstand life. But as we did mention, we have one more free play for you all. It's in the 4 p.m. Eastern time slot in the AAC championship game between UCF and number 18 Tulane. Tulane is a 3.5-point favorite. The over-under here is 56.5 at the moment. UCF Golden Knights, they clinched a spot in the AAC championship with their 7-point win over USF last week. They're one of 2 teams on the season to beat Tulane. In that game, quarterback Plumlee only had 132 passing yards and 1 touchdown, which sounds pretty shocking when you consider they put up 38 points in that game. Now, the reason for this was that the Golden Knights absolutely destroyed Tulane with their rushing attack, which was led by Plumlee. He had 176 rushing yards alone, and the team put up 336 on Tulane as a whole. They averaged 6.2 yards per carry, and Plumlee himself averaged about 10 yards per carry in that one. Now, obviously, Tulane should be a little more prepared this time around for that rushing attack of the Golden Knights. They're going to need to probably rely a little more on Plumlee's arm in this one to go through that Tulane defense. This could be a problem, though, as they're only averaging 242 yards per game, and Plumlee has just below 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Obviously, though, if they run the football early and Tulane still can't stop them, they're going to continue with that game plan. But if Tulane packs the box and has a much better rushing defense this time around, it's going to be interesting to see how UCF adjusts. Now, on the other side of the football, UCF's defense also gave up 31 points in that game, but on the year they are only giving up 21 points per game to their opponents. They've had a lot of issues stopping the run, giving up 150 yards per game on the ground, with a below-average secondary as well. They really can't afford to bring guys down into the box and help out. So expect Tulane to have a balanced attack this week with an emphasis on running the football first to lead into some play-action passing. Now, on the other side of the football, speaking of Tulane, as we mentioned, Tulane struggled to defend that run against UCF, but they have struggled all season. Even after that horrible showing 3 weeks ago, they proceeded to give up 142 yards to SMU, as well as 200 yards on the ground to Cincinnati last week. Luckily for them, though, they have a very good secondary, one that only gives up 182 passing yards per game. We can see them playing a lot of tight man coverage in this one to free up safeties and linebackers to fill in those gaps on the line and try to stop that UCF run game. Offensively for the Green Wave, they have put up 34.4 points this season, and a majority of that production has come from their running back, Spears, who has 1,200 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns, and has been virtually impossible to stop. If you add in quarterback Michael Pratt putting up his 9 touchdowns as well, this team has done a very good job utilizing the options out of the backfield to get in the end zone. Pratt can also throw the footballs. He's got 24 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. Honestly, this offense is going to have no problem putting up 30 points plus against the UCF defense this week. So what is our pick in this AAC championship game on Saturday? Well, with how good both these offenses are, we don't see this one being too much of a defensive game. Sure, it might come down to a final stop, but it should definitely be a high-scoring affair. In the game earlier they played this season, they combined for 69 points. Both teams ranked 23rd and 41st in yards per play and 21st and 40th in points per play. There has been little to no emphasis on defense for either of these teams on the entire season, and we just don't see that changing this week. So with our final play of Championship Saturday, we're going to take UCF Tulane over 56.5 points. Well, that is it for us here at Grandstand Bettors. As always, sit back, relax, enjoy Championship Saturday in college football, and we'll see you here in the month of December for our College Bowl predictions.